The 32nd Melbourne Queer Film Festival is about to hit here in Melbourne from the 10th to the 21st of November. And it's my great pleasure, as always, to talk to the artistic director of the Melbourne Queer Film Festival, Spiro Economopoulos. Spiro, welcome again to Movie Metropolis.
Hi, Peter. Really nice to be back on the show again. I feel like it's just been a minute since the last time we spoke.
It was just a little while back when you had a mini festival, a mini event, and so on. But
That's
but
right.
now you're back with an in-person event,
Yeah.
which I suppose you're really happy about because the challenges you've had over the last few years have been quite incredible.
Yeah, look, it is really great to be back in person again. Obviously, we're still doing a hybrid version of the festival after the main festival kind of ends. Sort of going to festivals in person and kind of being able to present films, with an audience, which is, my ideal way of watching a film.
Exactly. Now, the full program, when we're recording this, the full program hasn't quite been announced yet, but we will talk about it now.
Yeah.
I noticed that there's a opening and closing and a really centerpiece, if you like, on
Yes.
Brazilian cinema.
Yeah, look, actually, we've got an Australian centerpiece, which is really exciting, but we've got a spotlight on Brazilian cinema, and the opening and closing night film kind of fold into that as well, which is really exciting. I think for me, it's been really interesting as a programmer, just seeing all the incredible films that are coming out of Brazil, particularly over the last, 7+ years that I've been the program director on the festival. And I think it's particularly interesting that, Brazil is a country that has got, endemic anti-queer, sort of violence. And it's interesting to see how artists are responding to that and reacting against that. And I think all the films that are within the program speak to that directly and indirectly as well.
Okay, can you talk about the opening night film, Private Desert?
Yes, Private Desert. This is a really wonderful drama. Again, as I said, from Brazil. This is about a burnt out cop who is basically having an internet romance, so to speak, with a young woman who suddenly kind of goes off the radar, and he decides to take some time off from work and pursue finding out where this woman is, and how this unfolds as part of the film's kind of wonderful mystery, actually. And I think it has a lot of really, really lovely surprises along the way.
Okay, and also the closing night film, Rising Forest.
Yeah, Ura, the Rising Forest is a really, really fantastic documentary about a trans non-binary Indigenous activist and performance artist who uses their work to kind of speak to the destruction of what's going on with the Amazon forest at the moment. And it's this really beautiful kind of portrait of this performer, and how they're kind of enveloping that in their art, and also inspiring younger activists to kind of take the call as well. Just wanted to note as well that our closing night film is going to be on the Pride Centre rooftop, which is really exciting. This is one of our new locations for the year. So it's going to be great to get some screenings outdoors.
Okay, is that in St Kilda?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's on Fitzroy Street in St Kilda at the Victorian Pride Centre.
Ah, very good. Now, we should say the other venues are Acme, Jam Factory, and the Nova Cinema. Um,
Yeah, that's correct.
Excellent. So now tell me about sourcing films, and then we'll talk about some of the other films more specifically. I gather it's relatively easy for you to have access to a whole range of queer based films around the world.
It's been a yeah, look, there's definitely a lot more out there in terms of what we're choosing from. I think we're really now very firmly in a world where streaming services have become a very big part of the filmmaking kind of, and the film culture in general. And so a lot of the films a lot of mainstream films end up going on streaming services directly, including queer cinema. So I think the choices that we've got to pick from sometimes can be a little bit more eclectic, but I think that's a good thing as well, because I think what we're doing is kind of digging deeper into those queer narratives and finding stories that we don't usually kind of see and hear, and particularly that aren't kind of really represented through these kind of channels that are very much part of the film landscape at the moment.
Okay.
But yeah, but I do think that the window that I have as a programmer is definitely tightening in terms of how long films, will debut at a big film festival overseas, and then debut on a streaming service or come to cinemas. I think that window is a little bit smaller.
Uh-huh. Very interesting. So in this year's 32nd festival, how many films will be screening across the 12 days of the festival?
Well, we have an amazing 149 features, docos and shorts screening this year, which is really exciting, including 35 of those are Australian premieres. So it's a pretty kind of robust lineup.
That is a pretty big festival, so well done on that. Now, I
Yeah.
noticed there's an Australian film in the mix called The Longest Weekend.
Yes, the longest weekend is part of our Australian centerpiece, which is very exciting. And it's a wonderful feature by a filmmaker called Molly Hadden, which kind of looks at a family in Sydney who a queer young woman, straight siblings, and very much about them all kind of coming together, all kind of been living very separate lives. And it's sort of about them connecting over the relationship they have with their estranged father as well. It's a really, really, really lovely drama, I think, actually.
Okay. So can you talk about, we'll talk about international features shortly, but about,
Yeah.
and docos, but tell me more about the Australian films that will be screening at MQFF.
Well, apart from The Longest Weekend, we have another film called Lonesome. Lonesome made its debut at the Melbourne International Film Festival not that long ago, but this is a really exciting film by a filmmaker called Craig Borum, about a young country boy who hits the big city and has a sort of series of sexual adventures. I think it's got a really interesting film, very queer, and I think really leans into its queerness in the most wonderful way. I think sometimes it's really lovely to see that sexuality kind of portrayed in such an upfront manner. And Lonesome definitely doesn't hold back. Um,
Yep.
and the other one we have is a really great web series called Single Out by a Melbourne filmmaker called Lee Galea. And we're showing the entirety of the first season at the festival. So that's going to be really exciting. Melbourne premiere of that.
Okay, very good. Actually, I think I noticed Lonesome has been entered into the ACTA Awards for the feature film
Yeah.
category. So how interesting. Okay. Very
Yeah,
good.
it's getting a lot of traction, I think. Yeah, around festivals. Yeah.
Okay. Now let's talk about international features. We've talked about and docos. We've talked about Brazilian films, but tell me more about some highlights from other countries.
Well, a couple apart from that Brazilian strand, one of the other strands that I'm, personally very excited about is the freak out strand, which is our sort of genre kind of focus and spotlight. And I think over the last few years, there's been such a great sort of resurgence and kind of look at kind of queer horror and genre films, and they're kind of, I think, they're kind of getting celebrated and elevated more and more, and I think we're seeing more and more of it. So I think that spotlight came at a really good time. It's a short showcase, and it also includes a feature film called Hypochondriac, which is an Australian premiere, and a really interesting film called Heartbeast. And I really recommend both of those films as well. One other film that I really responded to is a movie called Chrissy Judy, which is a feature film from America, which kind of looks at the relationship between two friends who run a drag sort of show together. And one of them decides to kind of call it quits because they've fallen in love. And the film kind of becomes about this other man's kind of, I suppose, finding their own way. It's sort of a really interesting film about queer friendships as well. Very, has a very sort of salty edge to it, and a sort of really healthy cynicism to it as well. But I quite liked it. And another movie that I think is really wonderful is an Argentinian drama called Wandering Heart, about a father and his very complicated relationship with his teenage daughter, but also his unraveling when his long-term partner breaks up with him, and he kind of sort of goes off the rails. And I just think it's a really fantastic character portrait that really reminded me of a lot of John Cassavetes' earlier works, to be honest with you. And I think it's a really exciting film and incredible central performance by the lead actor.
Okay. And as usual, you have films from the US that you've sort of alluded to, and Europe. Any particular highlights from there?
Let's see. I really like a film called El Hub, which is a film that explores a young Arab man's basically coming out to his family, which is really interesting. And it's sort of this very kind of blackly comedic chamber piece about him coming to terms and trying to get his family to accept it, but also looking back at his own life and his own kind of coming out journey, which I quite liked. And another film I just wanted to highlight, which is part of our Brazilian showcase, is Mas One, which is a really wonderful family drama set right at the beginning or a few months after the election where Bolsonaro came into power. And it's very much about this family's kind of response to that. In particular, the daughter who is falling in love with a girl for the first time. And I think it's a really lovely film that has this interesting kind of subtext hanging over its head as well.
Okay. Okay. There are two other titles that I was sent to look at. My Emptiness and I and Black as You Are.
Yeah, look, My Emptiness and I is an absolutely fantastic drama by a filmmaker called Adrian Silvestri. We screened his previous feature, Sediments, back in our mini festival in April. And My Emptiness and I takes a similar approach where he works very closely with the actors in the film to kind of tell their own story and create like a fictional narrative out of it. And this is very much centered on this young trans woman's journey into basically transitioning and also finding and exploring her own sexuality as well. And I think very rarely do we see kind of trans, I think sexuality kind of portrayed in this way. And I think the film does it in such a lovely way where you really kind of go on the journey with this young woman as she begins to explore her new body and that part of herself. And, I think it's really done in a really great way. And the central performance is excellent. The other one, the other film that you mentioned, Black as You Are, is just a really fantastic documentary that looks at the Black Lives Matter movement, but very specifically through a queer lens, and very much about that intersection between that activism and also who gets left out of that sort of conversation, particularly around queer people who sometimes face their own discrimination within their own communities as well, particularly Black queer people, which is what the story is about. And so it's a really powerful and very complex look at being Black and queer during this Black Lives Matter era. It's really good film.
Okay, very good. And as always, you have sessions of short films in particular themes, I think.
Yeah, we do. We have a few of our regular ones back, including our comedy shorts. We have our Asia Pacific focus back. Obviously, our Australian shorts and awards showcase, which is one of our kind of really centerpieces of our shorts packages, is back, and I'm really excited about it. Off the Brazilian spotlight, we have a fantastic selection of Brazilian shorts, which I really liked. They're all kind of, the shorts packages are always such a kind of joy to put together because there's so many fantastic films to choose from. And I think it's a real strong selection this year.
Okay. A question for you. I'd be interested to know the demographic of the audiences that you attract? Because I mean, I suspect it's mostly a queer audience, but I put that in the context of I think it's Billy Eichner and his film
Yeah.
Bros, which I know is premiering on Sunday, and he
Yeah,
says that
and we're
audiences
screening it as well, actually.
ah well, he said that audiences didn't attend or didn't go to his film because they're straight and they don't go to gay films. How much currency do you put in that sort of comment?
Oh God, that's a complicated one. I think I think the thing with Bros was that the film, I don't know, like the film was particularly the way that it was marketed was specifically very much like, you should see this film because it's important. But in actual fact, the film, I've seen the movie and it's really wonderful and it's a really great comedy. And I think that selling point of that movie is that if you loved Forgetting Sarah Marshall, if you loved, the other films by this filmmaker, you're going to love this movie as well. It's in that same vein. I think if you're aiming for a mainstream audience, they're the kind of selling points for it. Look, whether there's probably some truth in Billy's comments as well in terms of straight audiences maybe not showing up for a very queer kind of movie, but I think what he did with that is great. I think the movie really is very queer and doesn't hold back, very very specifically hones in on queer sexuality and celebrates that. And if I'm sort of glad that he did what he did with that movie. And I think it's sort of unfortunate people are focusing on the film's failures, when in actual fact the movie has gotten an A+ cinema score, which is a very high score for the audience testing that they do. The reviews have been incredible, and in some ways I really kind of hope that it finds its audience eventually. And this is why we're screening it, because ultimately these films are a great place to come see. A great way to see them is with a queer audience who are going to respond to it in a very different way. And it's okay that we can be different and have different audiences to these films. And not everyone has to you know not everyone has to be the same. But I still think that with Bros, there's a lot to like. I would imagine as a straight person as well, because it's very funny. That's a
Okay.
very long answer.
No,
A
no,
very
it's a good
long
one.
diplomatic answer to his complicated question.
No,
But yeah,
that's
I feel
fine.
I feel bad for him. Yeah, I sort of feel bad for Bill. I think he's kind of been yeah, I don't know. I totally get his disappointment, and I sort of go, yeah, of course he's going to be disappointed that a lot of people didn't show up for that film, which deserves it.
Okay, no, I look forward to seeing it. So, okay, sounds interesting. All right, any other highlights that you'd like to mention at this year's Melbourne Queer Film Festival?
A couple of other little things. We've got a great sort of Australian doco double feature, two short featurettes called Victorian Queens and The Alexander Ball, which are two really fantastic kind of pieces that together look at the way that the queer community sort of celebrates and embraces diversity within their own sort of subcultures. And in particular, this looks at the drag scene in Melbourne and the ballroom scene, which is the Alexander Ball. So I think it's a really interesting documentary that kind of spotlights that. And another one, just I think because I always love music documentaries, and docos about sort of those kind of cultural sort of subcultures, is a doco called Blitz, which is about the sort of very short-lived era of the Blitz nightclub in the UK, which really kind of gave birth to that new romantic kind of movement, in particular the musicians and the artists. And it's got some really fantastic interviews with people like Boy George and Spano Ballet. And yeah, it's a real kind of fun sort of watch for people that are really interested in that era.
Sounds like a very interesting program, November 10th to the 21st for the 32nd Melbourne Queer Film Festival. So, Spiro, let's talk about website, booking tickets, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, so basically, first of all, again, our dates are November 10th to 21st. Our online focus starts from the 21st to 27th, and you can buy tickets on mqff.com.au. And I always recommend downloading the app, which is always a really handy thing to have on your phone to buy tickets from. And tickets go on sale from Thursday.
Okay, excellent. And just before we finish, Spiro, have you seen anything else apart from everything we've been talking about in cinemas or
Yeah.
streaming or whatever that has impressed
I,
you?
I always like I always like this question, I have to say, and I was prepared this time. Well, because it's October and it's spooky season, I'm going to recommend Smile, which is a really fantastic horror film that I think everyone's been surprised by how well it's done, and I just kind of think it goes to show that with a small budget, this film's already tripled its budget. You can kind of make really exciting, original kind of, although this kind of borrows, I think, from a few other films, but really exciting content. And it's really, I'm really thrilled to see, these kind of, that genre kind of getting its moment, which it's definitely having at the moment.
Look, I certainly agree with your comments. I was also impressed by Smile, and also the
Yeah.
Melbourne, the Melbourne Queer Film Festival, 10th to the 21st of November, at various venues, and then streaming online, I should say, straight after the festival. And we've been speaking to the artistic director of Melbourne Queer Film Festival, Spiro Economopoulos. Spiro, as always, great to talk to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Peter. I really enjoyed the chat.
All the best. See you later.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.